Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the economic rules shaping your future are quietly changing while most people aren't even paying attention. This is not a prediction from a distant future or a headline from decades away. It is happening right now. The biggest wealth transfer in American history has begun, and its impact will reach every family, every community, and every generation in this room. For decades, wealth in America has been concentrated in the hands of older generations, particularly the baby boomers, who built assets through home ownership, pensions, and long-term investments. Today, as this generation ages, an unprecedented amount of money, trillions of dollars, is beginning to move from one generation to the next. This transfer is not just about inheritance. It is about power, opportunity, and the chance to redefine what economic success looks like in the 21st century. Here's the hook: this wealth transfer could either widen the gap between the rich and the poor, or it could help close it. Younger generations, including millennials and Gen Z, are set to receive assets at a time when they face rising student debt, high housing costs, and economic uncertainty. The question is not whether the wealth transfer will happen, but who will benefit from it and how wisely it will be used. This moment also exposes deep inequalities in American society. Not all families have wealth to pass down, and not all communities will experience this transfer equally. If we ignore this reality, the wealth gap may grow even larger. But if we invest in education, financial literacy, and fair economic policies, this historic shift could become a powerful tool for economic mobility and shared prosperity. So why does this matter to us today? Because we are not just witnesses to this change, we are participants in it. The choices we make, the policies we support, and the knowledge we gain will shape how this wealth transfer influences our future. Whether it becomes a story of missed opportunity or one of economic renewal depends on what we do right now. The biggest wealth transfer in American history is not just about money changing hands, it is about responsibility changing minds. It is a chance to rethink fairness, opportunity, and the kind of economy we want to build. The transfer has begun, but the outcome is still being written. Let us be the generation that turns this historic moment into a future of opportunity for all. The United States is entering an economic moment unlike any it has experienced before, one defined not by sudden market crashes or technological revolutions, but by the quiet and steady movement of wealth across generations. An unprecedented volume of financial assets, real estate, businesses, and investments is in the process of shifting ownership, making this the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in American history. Estimates place the total value in the tens of trillions of dollars, a scale so vast that it rivals the size of the entire national economy. This transfer is not a future event waiting to arrive. It is already underway, reshaping the financial landscape in ways that will influence economic outcomes for decades. At the center of this shift is the accumulation of wealth by older generations over the past half-century. Baby boomers, in particular, benefited from a period of strong economic growth, rising home values, expanding pension systems, and accessible capital markets. These conditions allowed wealth to compound over time, especially through property ownership and long-term investments. As this generation ages, assets that were once tightly held are beginning to change hands, moving into the portfolios of heirs, beneficiaries, and financial institutions. The magnitude of this movement is staggering, and its implications extend far beyond individual families. What makes this transfer especially significant is its concentration in asset-based wealth rather than income. Much of the value being passed down exists in homes, equities, retirement accounts, and privately held businesses. These are not liquid resources that can be easily spent. They are assets that influence investment behavior, credit access, and long-term financial security. When ownership of these assets shifts, it alters patterns of consumption and investment across the economy. A single inherited property can determine whether a household rents or owns, whether it accumulates debt or builds equity, and whether it remains economically vulnerable or financially resilient. This wealth transfer is also occurring during a period of heightened economic pressure for younger generations. Rising housing costs, persistent student debt, and slower wage growth have made asset accumulation increasingly difficult. Against this backdrop, inherited wealth becomes more than a financial benefit. It becomes a defining economic advantage. The transfer has the power to accelerate wealth, building for some while leaving others further behind, creating stark contrasts in financial outcomes that are rooted not in productivity or effort, but in timing and access. The scale of this transfer demands attention because it represents a structural shift in capital ownership. Trillions of dollars moving across generations will influence financial markets, housing demand, and investment trends. It will shape who has the ability to take risks, start businesses, and withstand economic downturns. The question is no longer whether this wealth transfer will impact the economy, but how deeply and how unevenly its effects will be felt. In this moment, the movement of wealth is not just a private family matter. It is a macroeconomic force capable of redefining opportunity, stability, and economic power in modern America. Behind the largest wealth transfer in American history lies a powerful and often overlooked economic force: demographic change. The aging of the population, particularly the baby boomer generation, is not just a social phenomenon, but a structural driver reshaping capital ownership, labor markets, and long-term economic behavior. When a generation that holds a disproportionate share of national wealth begins to retire, downsize, and pass on assets, the effects ripple far beyond individual households. This demographic shift is quietly rewriting the flow of money in the economy, and its influence is only beginning to be felt. Baby boomers represent one of the largest and wealthiest generations in U.S. history. Born during a period of post-war expansion, they entered adulthood in an economy characterized by rising wages, affordable housing, and expanding access to credit. Over time, they accumulated substantial wealth through homeownership, employer-sponsored retirement plans, and long-term participation in equity markets. Today, this generation controls a significant share of total household wealth, creating a situation in which demographic aging directly translates into massive financial redistribution. As boomers move into later stages of life, their economic priorities shift from accumulation to preservation and transfer, setting the wealth transition in motion. Longer life expectancy has intensified this process. Advances in healthcare and living standards mean that wealth is often transferred later in life, sometimes in complex stages that include gifts, trusts, and phased inheritances. This extended timeline affects how and when younger generations receive assets, influencing decisions related to education, housing, and entrepreneurship. A delayed transfer can mean postponed home ownership or increased reliance on debt, while an earlier transfer can unlock investment opportunities and financial stability. In both cases, demographics dictate the pace and structure of capital movement across generations. This aging trend also intersects with labor market dynamics. As older workers retire, they reduce their labor income while maintaining ownership of capital assets. Younger generations, in contrast, rely more heavily on wages while facing barriers to asset accumulation. This imbalance reinforces the importance of inherited wealth as a determinant of economic mobility. The demographic shift does not merely move wealth, it changes who earns income from labor and who benefits from returns on capital, reshaping the fundamental structure of economic inequality. At the same time, declining birth rates add another layer of complexity. Fewer heirs in many families mean that wealth is often concentrated among a smaller number of beneficiaries, amplifying its economic impact. In some cases, this leads to significant per capita inheritance. In others, it results in wealth flowing into institutional investors or charitable foundations. These outcomes influence capital markets, consumption patterns, and even public finance, as governments respond to an aging population with increased spending on healthcare and retirement benefits. What makes this demographic shift so compelling is that it operates slowly but relentlessly. There is no single headline or dramatic event announcing its arrival, yet its effects are embedded in housing markets, financial systems, and generational opportunity. The movement of wealth driven by aging, longevity, and population change is not an abstract trend. It is a defining economic force shaping who holds capital, who accesses opportunity, and how the American economy evolves in the years ahead. One of the most consequential aspects of the current wealth transfer is its potential to reshape wealth inequality in the United States, either by narrowing long-standing gaps or by pushing them to unprecedented levels. Wealth, unlike income, compounds over time, creating advantages that extend across generations. When vast amounts of capital move from one generation to another, the distribution of that capital becomes a defining economic issue. This transfer is not occurring on a level playing field, and the uneven starting positions of American households mean that its effects on inequality could be profound and lasting. Households with significant assets are positioned to benefit the most from this transfer. Families that already own property, businesses, or diversified investments are more likely to pass down wealth that continues to generate returns. This inherited capital can be used to purchase homes, fund higher education, start businesses, or invest in financial markets, reinforcing a cycle of wealth accumulation. For these households, the transfer functions as an economic accelerator, allowing wealth to grow faster than wages and further separating asset owners from those who rely primarily on labor income. At the same time, millions of Americans will receive little to no inherited wealth. Historical disparities in income, access to credit, housing discrimination, and educational opportunity have limited asset accumulation for many families. As a result, the wealth transfer risks amplifying existing inequalities rather than correcting them. When some individuals enter adulthood with financial cushions and others begin with debt and insecurity, the gap between them widens not because of differences in effort or skill, but because of inherited advantage. This dynamic challenges the idea of equal economic opportunity and raises fundamental questions about fairness in a market-based system. The structure of the transfer also matters. Much of the wealth being passed down is tied to assets that benefit from favorable tax treatment, such as real estate and equities. These policies can magnify inequality by allowing wealth to move across generations with minimal erosion, while wages and savings face heavier taxation and inflationary pressures. As inherited wealth grows in importance relative to earned income, economic outcomes become increasingly influenced by family background rather than productivity, innovation, or participation in the labor market. There is also a geographic dimension to this inequality. Wealth transfers are more concentrated in regions with high property values and strong financial markets, intensifying regional disparities. Communities already experiencing economic growth may see further investment and prosperity, while areas with limited inherited wealth may struggle to attract capital and opportunity. This uneven flow of resources can shape housing markets, local economies, and access to public services, reinforcing cycles of advantage and disadvantage across generations and locations. Yet this moment also presents a rare opportunity. If managed thoughtfully through policy interventions, education, and inclusive investment strategies, the wealth transfer could support broader economic participation, expanding access to financial literacy, encouraging productive investment, and addressing structural barriers to asset ownership could help prevent inherited wealth from becoming a permanent dividing line. The stakes are high because once wealth inequality becomes entrenched across generations, it becomes far more difficult to reverse. The current transfer stands at the intersection of private inheritance and public consequence, making it one of the most influential economic developments of our time. The scale of the ongoing wealth transfer carries significant implications for economic growth, with the potential to either stimulate long-term productivity or reinforce structural weaknesses within the economy. Growth is not driven solely by the amount of wealth in circulation, but by how that wealth is allocated, invested, and put to work. As trillions of dollars move into the hands of new owners, the decisions made with this capital will influence entrepreneurship, innovation, and overall economic dynamism. This moment represents a critical test of whether inherited wealth can function as a catalyst for growth rather than a mechanism for stagnation. When transferred wealth is channeled into productive investment, it can expand the economy's capacity, Capital directed toward new businesses, technological development, and human capital formation increases productivity and job creation. Inheritors who invest in education, research, or enterprise contribute to long-term growth by enhancing skills and innovation. In this sense, the wealth transfer can act as an economic stimulus, providing resources at a time when younger generations often lack the capital necessary to take risks, start companies, or invest in high-growth sectors. The injection of capital into these areas has the potential to strengthen competitiveness and sustain economic expansion. The opposite outcome is equally possible. If transferred wealth is primarily allocated to passive assets, such as speculative real estate or financial instruments, disconnected from productive activity, growth benefits may be limited. Excessive concentration of wealth in housing markets can drive up prices without increasing supply, reducing affordability and constraining labor mobility. Similarly, capital locked into low-risk, low-productivity investments may preserve wealth, but fail to generate meaningful economic value. In this scenario, the wealth transfer reinforces asset inflation rather than supporting broad-based growth. The macroeconomic environment further complicates these outcomes. An aging population tends to favor capital preservation over risk-taking, potentially reducing the flow of investment into innovative but uncertain ventures. If inherited wealth adopts these same conservative patterns, the economy may experience slower productivity growth. Younger generations receiving wealth may face competing incentives, balancing financial security with the need to deploy capital in ways that generate returns. The tension between safety and growth will shape how effectively transferred wealth contributes to economic performance. There is also a distributional aspect to growth outcomes. When wealth is concentrated among a small segment of the population, its impact on aggregate demand may be muted. High-wealth households typically spend a smaller proportion of their income and assets, limiting consumption-driven growth. In contrast, broader distribution of capital can increase spending, investment, and participation in the economy. The structure of the wealth transfer therefore matters not only for individual outcomes, but for overall economic momentum. Financial markets will play a central role in mediating these effects. Increased inflows of inherited wealth into equities, private equity, and alternative investments can influence asset prices and market volatility. While this can support capital formation, it also raises the risk of bubbles if investment outpaces underlying economic fundamentals. The challenge lies in aligning private incentives with public economic goals, ensuring that transferred wealth supports innovation, resilience, and sustainable growth rather than short-term gains. This moment underscores a fundamental economic truth. Wealth alone does not generate growth, purposeful investment does. As ownership of capital shifts, so too does the responsibility for shaping the economy's future. The decisions made during this transfer will determine whether it becomes a driver of renewed economic vitality or a force that deepens inefficiencies and limits long-term potential. The outcome of the largest wealth transfer in American history will not be determined by market forces alone, but by the policies that govern wealth movement and the level of financial understanding among those who receive it. Government decisions on taxation, inheritance laws, and investment regulation shape how wealth is preserved, distributed, and utilized across generations. At the same time, financial literacy influences whether inherited assets become tools for long-term stability or sources of short-lived consumption. Together, policy frameworks and financial knowledge form the invisible architecture guiding this historic shift. Tax policy plays a particularly influential role. Estate taxes, capital gains treatment, and exemptions determine how much wealth is transferred and in what form. Favorable tax structures can allow large concentrations of wealth to pass between generations with limited redistribution, reinforcing existing economic hierarchies. Conversely, well-designed policies can encourage productive investment and fund public goods such as education and infrastructure, indirectly benefiting broader segments of society. The challenge lies in striking a balance between protecting incentives for saving and investment, while preventing excessive accumulation that undermines economic mobility. Regulatory policy also affects how transferred wealth interacts with financial markets. Rules governing retirement accounts, trusts, and investment vehicles influence asset allocation decisions. These mechanisms can either promote long-term growth by encouraging diversified and productive investment, or contribute to financial instability if they incentivize excessive risk-taking or speculation. Policymakers, therefore, play a critical role in shaping the channels through which inherited wealth enters the economy, often with consequences that extend far beyond the original beneficiaries. Equally important is financial literacy, which determines how individuals interpret and manage wealth once it is received. Inheriting assets without the knowledge to manage them effectively can lead to misallocation, overconsumption, or rapid depletion. Studies consistently show that financial education improves decision-making related to saving, investing, and risk management. As younger generations inherit increasingly complex portfolios, the ability to understand financial instruments, tax obligations, and long-term planning becomes essential. Without this knowledge, wealth can disappear within a single generation, limiting its economic impact. The absence of widespread financial literacy also deepens inequality. Those with access to professional advisors and financial education are better positioned to preserve and grow inherited assets, while others may struggle to navigate complex financial systems. This knowledge gap compounds existing disparities, making education not just a personal advantage, but a macroeconomic concern. Expanding access to financial education through schools, workplaces, and public programs could help ensure that inherited wealth contributes to economic participation rather than exclusion. This intersection of policy and literacy creates a powerful leverage point. Strategic reforms combined with improved financial education can transform the wealth transfer into an engine for inclusive growth. Encouraging long-term investment, supporting entrepreneurship, and reducing barriers to asset ownership require coordinated action between public institutions and private individuals. The stakes are high because once wealth patterns solidify across generations, they become resistant to change. In this moment, the rules written by policymakers and the choices made by individuals will determine whether this historic transfer strengthens the economy as a whole or entrenches divisions that shape opportunity for decades.